In this presentation, I will be looking at occurrences of throat slitting in Ovid's Metamorphoses and examine the connection of this act to human sacrifice and cannibalism throughout the work. I will focus especially on the relationship between throat slitting, human sacrifice, and Pietas, which, broadly translated, refers to a sense of duty. I will focus on sections from the stories of Lycaon in Book 1, Teres and Procne in Book 6, Medea in Book 7, Palinestor and Polydorus in Book 13, and Pythagoras in Book 15. These passages, as well as any others from this or other ancient works mentioned, can be found on your handout, which is down in the link below. The first metamorphosis of a human is that of Lycaon, tyrant of Arcadia, who is transformed into a wolf after conducting an experientia, a test at Metamorphoses 1:225, of Zeus's divinity. Laughing at his people's piovota, pious vows, 1:221. Lycaon serves Zeus a slaughtered hostage, and as punishment, Zeus destroys his house in Penates, then further punishes humankind by destroying all but Deucalion and Pyrrha in a flood. This episode bears some resemblance to the trickery of Zeus by Prometheus in Hesiod's Theogony, which results in the punishment of man through the creation of Pandora, a story which does not appear in Metamorphoses, just as Lycaon and the flood are not discussed by Hesiod. In Theogony 5:35-41, see handout 1 on Hesiod, Prometheus attempts to trick the gods into taking the worst part of an animal sacrifice by wrapping the victim's bones in fat and burning this on the altar, while keeping the meat to be eaten by the men conducting the sacrifice. Just as in Ovid's Lycaon narrative, Zeus immediately notices the trickery, yet still allows the sacrifice to happen in this way. This dolie techne, clever trick at the Theogony 540, of Prometheus is cited by Hesiod as the reason that bones wrapped in fat are burned on altars of the gods. Like Prometheus, Lycaon's trickery is characterized by an attempt to provide Zeus with an impious feast. Just as Prometheus's dolie techne is associated with the foundation of sacrificial practices by Hesiod, Lycaon's experientia is associated with the foundation of the Lycaon festival, the first religious festival to be established by a human, and the first sacrifice of a living creature, a human infant, to Zeus. This association of Lycaon with human sacrifice is apt, since the Molossian hostage he slaughters is fed to a god, feeding a god, of course, being the nominal purpose of sacrifice. More importantly, the language used to describe the slaughter and semi-cannibalistic preparation of the meal is appropriate for the description of sacrifice. See handout 2. As Burckhardt described in his seminal work about homo sacrifice, Homo necans, based on Plutarch's description of a funerary sacrifice in honor of those who died at Plataea, quote, "Swiftly drawing his sword, the Archon slit the black bull's throat so that the blood flowed onto the pyre. After this, he called the fallen warriors to supper to take their fill of the blood." End quote. After being led to the altar and having water sprinkled on them, the sacrificial victim would be killed by a slitting of the throat, and then part of the victim would be burnt on the altar, the bones and skin, while another part would be roasted for the participants of the sacrifice to consume. Like the Athenian Archon's black bull, Lycaon's Molossian hostage had his throat slit, Iuculum resolvit, and then his corpse split into parts and cooked in two separate ways. Partem ferventibus artis mollit aquis, partem subjecto torruit igni. The first specific act of human impiety in the Metamorphoses, which leads to the first human metamorphosis, is that of an improper/human sacrifice. The chief marker of this slaughter as sacrificial, I argue, is Lycaon's slitting of his victim's throat. There are 3 other instances in which a human victim is killed by the slitting of their throat. It is by Procne and Philomela in Book 6, Peleus by Medea in Book 7, and Polydorus by Palinestor in Book 13. These slaughters are all violations of Pietas. The chosen method of killing reinforces this impiety, since the murderers perform an impious sacrifice and a cannibalistic act, where they simultaneously commit an impious murder. The relationship between throat-slitting, pietas, sacrifice, and cannibalism is especially strong in the Procne and Medea narratives. In Books 7 and 6 of the Metamorphoses, the motif of throat-slitting appears 7 separate times, twice in Book 6 and 5 times in Book 7. The 2 instances in Book 6 take place during the Tereus and Procne story. Pietas is a main theme throughout the story, and actually spoken about by characters within it. Tereus perpetrates the initial violation of Pietas when he rapes his sister-in-law Philomela. In doing this, he, according to Carol Newlands in The Metamorphoses of Ovid's Medea, quote, betrays not only the kinship bonds that should have made rape of a sister-in-law taboo, but also the fundamental trust between husband and wife. After this rape, Tereus cuts out Philomela's tongue and leaves her in the middle of the woods. However, Philomela clearly expected a different outcome. See handout 3a. With Tereus just having violated filial and conjugal pietas, Philomela awaits her brother-in-law to enact his impiety through a pseudo-sacrifice. She is even, like the sacrificial victim from Homo Nacans, somewhat willing to be slaughtered. Philomela stretches forth, offering herself as a sacrifice to atone for Tereus' violation of her family's pietas. The man does not offer Philomela this escape from impiety, but rather forces her to continue to endure and participate in violating familial pietas in her life as a kept woman. Tereus' impiety then begets impiety in his wife Procne when she discovers his betrayal of herself and her father. Enraged by Tereus' impiety, Procne decides that her only choice for revenge can come through violating her own maternal pietas. Tereus and Procne's child Itis is impiously sacrificed by his mother and her sister in honor of their familial pietas. See handout 3b. The murder of Itis is a sacrifice in the fullest sense. The victim is consumed after his slaughter. The language of this event is very similar to that in the feast of Lycaon, though Ugulum is again resolved, this time by the ferm of Philomela. Then pars of Intis's animaeque aliquid retentia membra is exultat in cavis ainis, and another pars they stridunt unwearibus. Unlike in the story of Lycaon, Tereus does not have the benefit of omnipotence to keep him from actually taking part in the feast, and thus he eats the roasted remains of his son. Even upon a cursory reading, it is quite obvious that the story of Procne bears some similarity to the well-known tale of Medea, as told by Euripides. Both Procne and Medea are women scorned who kill their own children in revenge. Ovid largely passes over these events in the latter story, save for a brief mention of her children's slaughter. See handout 4e. In favor of a narrative focusing on Medea's metamorphosis from a timid and pious girl into a confident and menacing witch. While betrayal and filicide are not major themes in Ovid's retelling of Medea's tale, Ovid has already worked them into his reader's mind by contamination, of the Tereus and Procne story, according to David Larmer in Tragic Contaminatio in Ovid's Metamorphoses. There are many parallels between the Medea myth and tragedy and Ovid's Tereus. Along with the obvious child killing, there is the account of Procne's, quote, mental struggle over killing her son, from Larmer, reminiscent of Medea's soliloquy at Euripides 1042 ff, as well as the themes of Greek, specifically Athenian in the case of Procne and Philomela, versus barbarian and the ambiguity of this distinction. Larmer also notes that this was not the only work in which Ovid linked these two stories, as he also mentioned both together in Amores. That there is a strong connection between the Tereus and Procne story in Book 6 and the Medea story in Book 7 is well established. It remains to be shown how, other than through the basic thematic connection, Medea fits into the present argument. The next 5 instances of throat-slitting in Book 7 are all performed by Medea. The first throat is the guttura of a ram sacrificed to Hecate, see handout 4a. Medea makes this sacrifice as part of a prayer on behalf of Jason, asking for him to be successful. Medea makes this sacrifice for conjugal pietas, yet against filial pietas. She sacrifices to help her husband, who will, through his success, be defeating her father. The next throat to be split by Medea is that of Jason's father Aeson, see handout 4b. This jugulating is strange, since it does not end in death. This fact could at first seem to act against the sacrificial element of throat slitting, but it is certainly there. Though it did not end in death, the opening of Aeson's neck must not have been a pleasant experience. Thus, a sacrifice, though not here in the literal sense, had to be made in order for Aeson to be rejuvenated. Not only is Aeson making a sacrifice by having his throat slit, but the other sacrificial element inherent in all Ovidian throat-slitting episodes is also present, Pietas. Medea only agrees to perform this rejuvenation at the request of Jason, who is motivated by filial pietas. Again, this would still not be a literal sacrifice, but the strangeness of this event, the lack of a literal death, can explain this. The herbs that Medea pours into the throat of Aeson take the place of the blood that would pour out of the throat of a normal sacrificial victim. Medea's next victim also does not die as a result of having its throat slit. In order to convince Peleus' daughters to give their father the faux rejuvenation that will end in his death, Medea first proves her power on a ram, see handout 4c. This ram, like the first, has its goitre opened, and again its blood leaves its neck. After the would-be slaughter, Medea puts this ram into a cauldron, an act which in previous episodes would have ended with the animal prepared as a meal, but the magic herbs she adds to the water instead make it young again like Aeson. This ram is sacrificed as proof of Medea's trustworthiness, to appeal to the pietas of Peleus' daughters. Peleus himself, whose throat is slit only 34 lines later, see handout 4d, undergoes a similar experience to the ram, yet with a very different outcome. As Segal points out in Black and White Magic in Ovid's Metamorphoses, the magic herbs which are now missing are the element now missing which counteract death. The lack of Medea's magic gives the scene a cannibalistic theme, as does the mentioning of Peleus' mangled body, similar to the description of Itys' body at 643. The hot water is reminiscent of the water and cauldron used to soften the limbs of the Molossian hostage and Itys. While Medea has no pietas at stake in this scene, the daughters of Peleus, who are foolish enough to trust Medea, do. They mean to help their father, but instead kill him, their screams imitating the piercing screams of women accompanying an animal sacrifice. Jason, who is completely silent at this point in Ovid's narrative, also has some claim to familial pietas in this situation. Though Medea is given no real motive for killing Peleus by Ovid here, and other sources, including Ovid's Herodes 12, the crime is Jason's idea. If we assume that Jason also had some unmentioned say in the murder and the Metamorphoses, the slaughter of Peleus can be read as both an inversion of the sacrifice of Aeson, this time in violation of, rather than out of respect for, pietas, and a sacrificial offering as recompense for all the impious deeds committed by Peleus against his nephew Jason. Medea's final carnage is the killing of her children, C4e. Very little is said by Ovid of this event. The act certainly has sacrificial undertones in Euripides, and if we read the Greek playwright's psychological narrative into Ovid's brief mention, it can be seen as a sacrifice made out of maternal pietas to make up for Jason's violation of conjugal pietas. Along with the feeling of sacrifice inherent in Euripides' Medea, other versions of the Medea myth make her the perfect candidate to attribute murders suggestive of a human sacrifice. In both the Hellenistic prose Argonautica by the mythographer Dionysius Scyttobrachion and the version by the 6th century CE poet Dracontius, Medea is made priestess of a cult of Artemis established by her father, which practices xenoctonia, sacrifice of foreigners. Though in Dionysius' version, Medea disagrees with this practice and uses her magic to save potential victims, Dracontius makes no mention of this dissent and points out that she was even about to kill Jason before either Aphrodite or Eros intervened. There is only one more human to be killed in the sacrificial manner of throat-slitting in the Metamorphoses, Polydorus, a son of Priam, the hands of the Thracian king charged with the boy's protection, Polymnestor, see handout 5. Polymnestor violates Pietas in a similar manner to Tereus, breaking the trust of another king who gave over a child through the protection of a barbarian Thracian ruler. This act of human sacrifice is as foreign and barbaric as the xenoctonia practiced by the Colchians, both motifs that, quote, stress the strangeness of a barbarian land, from Graph. Though Polydorus is the last human in the Metamorphoses to have his throat slit, the image reappears in Pythagoras' argument for vegetarianism at the beginning of Book 15, see handout 6. Quam male quiscit quam separat ele crore impius humano, vituli qui gutera cultro, rompit ad immotas praebet mugitibus aures, aut qui vagitos similes puerilibus aedum, ad intem jugulare potest, aut alite vesci, cui dedit ipse cibos. The language of this jugulare is similar to previous instances of human throat slitting in general. The perpetrator of the crime is described as impious when he opens the guttura of an animal. Throughout Pythagoras' speech, the philosopher compares meat eating with cannibalism, based on his belief in transmigration. Eating meat necessarily means eating the flesh of a being which was once human. Just before the passage, he compared eating meat to eating at Thyestes' mensis, Thyestes' table. It is no accident that the language used to describe this slaughter in the passage is the language of sacrifice, as Pythagoras also condemns humans for blaming their cannibalistic feasts on the gods, using sacrifice as an excuse to eat their fellow living beings. To Pythagoras, the mensis at 15,462 is no less in violation of religious pietas than that of Lycaon at 1,230. Due to the length, placement, and nature of Pythagoras' speech, which, according to Hardy and the speech of Pythagoras, in Ovid's Metamorphoses 15, quote, offers a miniature recapitulation of the whole of Ovid's Metamorphoses. It has become commonplace to see in the person of the Ovidian Pythagoras a figure for the poet Ovid himself, an identification that may be seen in the light of the close relationship that exists between the poets Ennius and Lucretius and their philosophical mentors, Homer and Epicurus, end quote. As much as human sacrifice and cannibalism are thematic and indicative of impiety in Pythagoras' many metamorphoses, these are also important themes of Ovid's poem. There is a concentration of sacrificial/cannibalistic slaughter in the larger Medea of Books 6 and 7, because this myth revolves around Pietas. Early on in the Metamorphoses, Ovid establishes the importance of this theme in the story of Lycaon. That human sacrifice, cannibalism, and pietas would be major themes in an Augustan work by a discursive author is rather unsurprising. Throughout his Metamorphoses, Ovid is unconvinced by and questioning of Augustan propaganda. Pietas would be an especially appropriate topic, since proper pietas is a key goal of Augustus's imperial legislature, while his mistreatment of killing of friends, relatives, and subjects are in violation of the principle. During his likely tongue-in-cheek panegyric of Augustus at the end of Book 15, Ovid calls on many different gods to deify Augustus after his death, at a very old age, so that he may continue answering the prayers of Romans even when he is gone from Rome. See handout 7. How might Augustus have pleased so many gods during his lifetime that they would all be willing to grant Ovid's prayer? Perhaps through the sacrificial slaughter of so very many Romans. Thank you.